Hello, and thank you for tuning in. This is Season 2, Episode 8 of The Corner Office. My name is Steven Bronken, and today my special guest is Ted Harrington, who's the author and executive partner over at Independent Security Evaluators. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Ted. It's good to have you here on the Corner Office.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, of course, first question of the day is, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a Macallan 12-year, the Sherry Oak Cask. And the reason that I'm drinking that one, I was lucky enough earlier this year, right before everything shut down for the pandemic, I was lucky enough to actually be in Scotland. And I went and did whiskey tasting at a bunch of the different distilleries around the island. And one of those stops took me to Macallan. We had a great experience there. And so I've certainly been digging into some of this one's a pretty common bottle, but some of the more rare ones recently, it's been, it's more than just drinking the whiskey. I feel like I'm drinking an experience because it reminds me of the last time that I got to go on an international trip before everything shut down.
Gotcha. No, that's great. Macallan is definitely a great Scotch. So,
what about you? What are you drinking there?
I am actually drinking a Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. Like you, one of my last trips was actually down to Tennessee. So I was actually at the Jack Daniel's distillery, got the Jack Daniel's glass. Actually fell in love with Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. So just a couple cubes of ice, and it's ready to go. It's great whiskey.
That's so. Great, man.
All right, another staple, of course, of my show is tell me your best dad joke or pun that you got.
Yeah, when you're asking about these, I was racking my brain, and I remembered one that there's a guy who works for me who's very into dad jokes, and he says, where do you store all your dad jokes? in a database.
Let's get right to the meat and potatoes, of course, which is, with the COVID-19 crisis going on, you, of course, are a security expert. You've spoken before at different both HFTP, HT&G events, as well as a few other things I've seen yet. How do you think that COVID-19 has impacted the world from, an IT security standpoint?
Well, it's certainly raise the understanding of the reliance that we all, and not just you and I, and even the companies that we work for, but I mean, just the world in general, the reliance that we have on technology. And you see companies who haven't necessarily thought as seriously about it before now start to realize, hey, when we're looking at new ways to collaborate remotely, work from home, work from anywhere, all that kind of stuff, how can we do that securely? And I think that's a really positive thing for those conversations to be happening. And so, as undeniably, most of what's happening in the world right now is certainly not a good thing. I certainly am always trying to find the silver lining in the situation that we're in. And I think that one of the big pieces of silver lining certainly is that this awareness and understanding that security is so interwoven with our relationship with technology. I think that's a really, really good thing, because as a result, now organizations will start to prioritize it in ways that maybe in the past they haven't been able to, or didn't even realize that they should.
Definitely a big thing for sure. I know ourselves, our own company, we've actually developed a specific work from home AP that we could, deploy to the masses of a company so that only their specific devices can get on, and they're not sharing them with, everybody's cell phone on the block and everybody's gaming system of all the kids and so forth like that. So it's definitely a new world, and people got to start thinking about that for sure.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine works for a very large insurance company, and he's telling me the story to sort of like, let's put ourselves in their shoes, right? He said, they've got, I forget what the exact number was of employees, but it was in the 5-figure or 6-figure range. And we're talking a very large workforce. And because it's insurance, a lot of what they do requires printing, and like printing pieces of paper. Yep. And their logistical challenge was, how do we get the printing capability securely of this sensitive information that we have to our now distributed workforce. So it's literally as complex as how do we send around thousands of printers and secure them? And that's kind of crazy when you think about the complexity that is. And I don't even know if they've resolved that challenge yet. Hopefully by now, months later they have, but that's a meaty problem. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of problem that a lot of organizations are facing. Maybe not that specific thing, but the world is changing. How are we going to adapt to it?
So just on that note, I know the hospitality industry has been pushing for a lot of folks to get back to work and offering their rooms as a remote workspace for people during the day. And of course, with that, the FBI recently released a notice to consumers about using hotel Wi-Fi. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I saw that notice, and like any, somewhat scary headline, you always want to peel back layers of the onion and see what's really the advice here in this story. And what's interesting is even though the headline to this story is essentially be wary of hotel Wi-Fi, I think that's actually missing the point. The point is be wary of public Wi-Fi. And of course, in a hotel setting, that's certainly one version of it. Yeah. And then when you go to really understand the issue further, you realize that this isn't necessarily some new issue or some exploitable vulnerability that's been discovered out in the wild. This really just goes to typical best practices that people should follow, right? Which is that, use a secure network wherever you can. If you're not going to be able to use a secure network and you have to join public Wi-Fi, be aware that you're in a higher risk environment and do the things that you should do to protect yourself. So maybe don't access your most sensitive things. I wouldn't recommend doing your online banking while on public Wi-Fi. Access your corporate environment through a VPN or just set up your own VPN. There's all kinds of things that you can do as an individual to protect yourself while accessing public Wi-Fi. And so I think the bottom line is for your audience here, Steve, is that this isn't like the death toll for using Wi-Fi in the hospitality environment. It's just there is a different attack consideration to account for. I think there's even a couple things that we could think about in terms of this particular issue, right? So thing number one is for anyone who's going to connect to Wi-Fi in a hotel setting to make sure that you're actually connecting to the correct one, right? And when you go check in, the front desk tells you what the Wi-Fi network is. So make sure you connect to that one and don't connect to the one that sounds similar to it. And that's actually the attack technique that a lot of attackers like to use in public settings is they'll set up a malicious access point that sounds really similar, right? So it might say Hilton Wi-Fi when it really should be H Honors or whatever. I don't know what the exact things might be, but they'll make it sound similar. And so if you're not paying attention, you click to the wrong one, you're now essentially traversing all your traffic across a malicious endpoint. So that's one, and that's pretty easy once people are aware to do that. Every guest can do that. Say, they gave me a piece of paper. Do I connect to the thing that the piece of paper tells me to do? I can do that. Yeah. The second thing is, and I guess maybe this is even a question for you. I don't know the answer to this, but as I stay in a lot of hotels, just the course of my business gets me traveling a lot. And then I enjoy travel personally. So I've been in a lot of hotels, and I've never once seen a hotel in any way communicate to me whether they are investing in someone like you guys, actually getting a professional grade network, or they're more of the sort of DIY setting it up themselves with their series of routers. And so, I guess the question that I have is, why is that the case, and why not advertise that to the guests to say, hey, you're staying here, and as a benefit, you get this enterprise class
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's a good question. And, it is something that isn't really advertised much to the consumer. Most of the major hotel brands, and actually I think almost all, except for maybe one or two, have standardized on a list of vendors. So meaning that they've specifically said only these providers can deploy Wi-Fi in our hotel. So that was step one, because beforehand there used to be 40 people in a truck. If you had two guys, a truck, and some idea of network capacity or load, you could actually deploy a Wi-Fi network, right? So the first step that they did, of course, was selecting vendors. The second step was enforcing standards within those vendors, right? And auditing those vendors as well. That was the third step, right? And making sure that those folks are held accountable, and that their scores are up, and that that they're actually deducted and graded, so to speak, based on the network and on their security. All the major providers today have done that. So meaning, for example, the ones that we're approved with, we're talking Marriott, we're talking Hyatt, we're talking Hilton, we're talking Choice, Wyndham, and even Best Western themselves have gone to that step. Redline has as well, and of course a few others. Sonesta has as well, where they've only selected specific vendors to do that, and they're working with those vendors to make sure that it's across the board. So I think that's really important. That control, that arm to kind of control that Wi-Fi is really good. But you're right. There's no, so to speak, classification, industry classification that transverses different brands that says you're getting this level of internet security at your property. So,
I mean, the reason I asked the question is that people today demand security, right? It's becoming an expectation. And I wrote this book that's called Hackable, that it focuses on software more so than network security, but the principles are largely the same in terms of how do you actually find vulnerabilities and how do you rank them by severity, how do you fix them. But really the key takeaway of all of it was the final chapter sort of that brings everything in the book together was, now how do you go and prove it? Because that's ultimately what buyers of enterprise class solutions want. And that's what even all of us as individual humans buying things, we also want that assurance of why is this secure? And I see a lot of challenges where companies first don't know how to actually do security. Then they don't know how to talk about it. And that's a really precarious combination. And I see a lot of marketing claims that are things like, if I had a dime for every time I see someone say highly secure, and then provide absolutely no justification or proof of what that even means. I mean, I'd be very wealthy if I had a dime for every time I've seen that happen. And so this is like bringing it back to this question about why is it not advertised to the individual guests? I think the guests checking in, I don't think they're going to be there at the check-in desk and say, well, I'm not going to complete the check-in if you don't prove to me that the Wi-Fi is working with an enterprise class provider. But they might feel a lot better because that unspoken concern is in the back of their mind if part of their sort of check-in materials is, here's what we're doing about your security, and here's why you should be comfortable using the Wi-Fi here if you follow these best practices. And I think the average guest would be like, wow, okay, great. I haven't seen that before, and that makes me feel good, and I like staying here now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think, given the way that everything's going and the more aware of IT that everyone is becoming, that could be down the road, right? Some sort of push from the brand saying, this is why our internet is secure. This is why you want to stay here. So for sure. All right. So what about any recommendations for those in the industry? I mean, other than, of course, the standard, like we just discussed in terms of internet security and internet Wi-Fi, what do you have?
Yeah, so I guess my advice, it depends on the audience it depends on the audience which piece of advice to give, but maybe I can start with the members of your audience who are like you, right? Who are building solutions to then sell those solutions to the hotel brands to get on the approved vendor lists. And ultimately, that's the business model. So I think for that category of people, as opposed to say the individual guests or even the hotel brands themselves, which would have slightly different recommendations I might make. So for people building things, I think the most important thing to think about would be to address the assumptions that you might not even realize you're making about how your system is being built. This is how systems get hacked all the time. because they're based on sort of flawed assumptions. But what's, I think, the important takeaway now, coming back to listeners of your show, is that they definitely are in the business of building things, and they assume those things are going to work in a certain way. It's almost every week, Steve, that I hear someone say some version of, oh, no one would think of that. Like, I'll literally say, well, what if an attacker did X? And they'll be like, oh, no one would think of X. And I'm like, I just did. I literally just thought of it and asked you it. So if I thought of it, someone else did.
Yep.
And those assumptions that are flawed about what people will or won't do, that's the kind of stuff that leads to companies becoming breached. And that's the whole mission in this book that I wrote. That's the whole mission in our security consulting business. Like, companies come to us so that we're the ones to help them find those problems rather than the bad guy finds those problems. And that's where my advice would be to anybody listening, that if you're building something, there are assumptions that you're making about how that system's going to operate. And you need to undermine those assumptions. You need to see how they're broken, because that is exactly what the attacker is going to do.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah, I mean, trying to think outside the box and go after something, I think is you're right, is the key to any type of vulnerability or exploit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I say all the time, right? It's actually sort of one of the taglines in my when I'm giving speeches and stuff, that I talk about this idea of think like a hacker, which, by the way, just to clarify, hacker is not a bad thing. The media has started to claim hacker = bad. That's only partly true. A hacker is somebody who solves problems and makes things behave differently than they're intended to. So, for example, like MacGyver, the show that, you might.
Now, are we talking the original one or the 2010 reboot?
Well, either. That's the same concept. He uses a paper clip to somehow start a car. He takes these things and makes them do something different. And that's what hacking is. It's arriving at these unintended outcomes by repurposing functionality, essentially. So hacker is not necessarily bad. Some hackers are bad, so the attackers are bad, but ethical hackers, people like me, are good. We're both hackers. It's just a matter of which is which. Yep. But so I have this idea of think like a hacker. I say that a lot.
Which hat are you wearing? Right? Black hat, white hat, etc.
Right. Well, I wear the white one for sure. But which type of hacker you are is of course a good question to ask. But when I say this to people, think like a hacker. What I'm getting at is this idea of trying to think about things differently. Right? Think about it from the other viewpoint, and the way that normal people think. Most people in the world try to understand the way that things are supposed to work, right? Try to understand the rules so you can play by them. But attackers and all kinds of hackers, good and bad, do the exact opposite. Try to understand how the thing is supposed to work. Try to understand the rules so that we can make it do something different. We can undermine it or make it behave differently. And that's really, really important. And it's also really hard to do. And not only is it hard to do, most people don't want to live like that, right? They don't want to always be looking at things and sort of seeing the bad in the world. They want to see the good in the world. And that's why people like me and our organization exists, because we love seeing the bad in the world so that we can eradicate it. But yeah, that's the big thing, right? Think like an attacker, think like a hacker, so you can find those flawed assumptions.
Where do you see the industry going in the next few years?
I think the more of a trend that has certainly been underway, which is rapid adoption of more software solutions in order to do all kinds of things, from enhancing the guest experience to making the business of actually being in the hospitality business, make that run more efficiently, more effectively, more profitably. But certainly I think what we've seen from the COVID crisis, the acceleration to touchless technology is, this is going to be explosive. There were definitely already companies working on that, but it was more of like a novelty before. Oh, that's kind of cool. I can check into my room without having to touch anything, but what problem is this really solving for me? Yeah. And now I think people are like, give me all of it. I want to touch nothing until I'm touching the pillow. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that adoption. But of course, that introduces new security risks.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the future.
Yeah. I was just thinking that, a lot of people use their Apple Pay, right? A lot of people now are using their phone to check into hotel rooms, are going to use their phone for the remote control. Your phone becomes the most valuable, but the most vulnerable piece of equipment in your IT arsenal, right? So folks are going to go after it, and that's going to be the hardest thing.
And you think about the way that it's worked in large enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
right? When the smartphone came out a while ago, back in 2007 or so was when Apple first launched the smartphone revolution. Companies really struggled with how to deal with this, what became known as bring your own device. It's this idea that people were bringing their own technology into corporate environments. Yeah. And it took corporate enterprises that have control over their own employees. It took them a long time to get their head around it. Mm-hmm. And now you're talking about a change where the guest, who is under no sort of reporting obligation to anybody in a hotel environment, bringing potentially malicious devices into these environments. And that's a precarious security position to be in.
Not only that, but the hotel is trying to make the guest feel most at ease, most at comfort, and give them anything that they want that's available at their house and any other situation. So yeah, you're right. You're essentially, you're welcoming them in, you're giving them a hug with both arms and saying, have at it, fill your boots, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Still while having to protect your IT infrastructure. Yeah.
And those aren't necessarily in conflict. It's not zero sum. It's not like you either can have security or you can have a great guest experience. You actually can have both. And in a lot of ways, the introduction of new technologies should actually improve the security of many approaches if they're built with security in mind. And that is a massive if, because historically what we've seen, and this is one of the other things that I cover in depth in my book, is how to actually do that, right? Because security is often seen as something that comes later, right? Let's build the solution, let's get it to the market, let's make sure that the customers and users like it, let's generate revenue or increase revenue if it already exists as a solution, and then we'll get to security eventually. But what winds up happening,
the holes when we got them.
Yeah, it creates a huge pain in the rear to deal with actually fixing that later.
Hey, cheers. Thank you very much for being here. I definitely appreciate your insight.
Absolutely.
Hey everyone, well that's a wrap for season 2, episode 8 of The Corner Office. I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks to Ted Harrington for being my guest. Of course, Ted is an author and an executive partner over at Independent Security Evaluators. For more information on Ted, I've included his LinkedIn information below, should you wish to reach out to him. Additionally, for more information on Safety NetAccess, our products and our services, please don't hesitate to visit our website at www.safetynetaccess.com. Until next time, don't forget to be safe, be healthy, be well, and hey, don't forget to be happy. Cheers, everybody. I'm filming from one of your favorite bars, Analog, which is, of course, is in San Diego, recently closed down, I think possibly due to COVID, but you had a story about it. Fill me in.
I was heading out for a night on the town with some friends, and I show up at Analog. I wanted to go there. I was meeting some friends who were already inside, and turns out there's a really long line, and there's a cover charge to get in once you get through that line. And so I'm like, I don't want to deal with either of those things. So I applied a lot of the principles that I teach, both in my security consulting business and in my book that I've written, about really how to think like an attacker. And I looked at this and I said, can I break this system? It wants me to go through the line. It wants me to pay the cover. Can I get in without doing either of those things? Mm-hmm. And so what I did was I walked right up to the VIP hostess and I said to her, hi, I'm on the list. Now, of course, I wasn't on the list, but I wanted her to believe that I was, because if she believed I was on the list, I would be able to cut the line and cut the cover. And so she says, okay, great. What's your name? Now, again, I'm not on the list, so just saying my name or guessing a name wasn't really going to help me. So what I needed to do was create some specially crafted inputs. And this is what attackers will do Now, this is, of course, I'm telling a story that's about social engineering, but these same principles are the same for attacking software or attacking networks, etc. So I issued this specially crafted input that was essentially, I said, well, I'm with the group. Now, I assumed there were some groups on the VIP list, and I wanted her to believe I was with one of them. And she says, oh, great. Well, which one? Now, again, I didn't know what names might be on that list, so just guessing wasn't going to help me. I needed her to tell me the group's name. So I said, again, especially crafted input, I just said the big one.
Yeah.
I was guessing that one of the groups was bigger than the other. And so, of course, she flips through her notepad and she says, the Smith party? Bingo. Right. And I said, yes, I am with the Smith party. And so with that, she peels back the velvet rope, escorts me past the line, past the bouncer, and right into the bar. Now I more than made up for the cover charge that I did not pay with the bar tab and the food tab that I spent there. So I don't feel too bad about it. But that was I think a really funny example of this idea of how do you undermine the assumptions of the way a system works. Like, her whole purpose was to let VIPs in and keep everyone else out, and I was everyone else. But I made it behave differently. And it's kind of funny that here we are talking about bar stories, and that's actually one of the stories that I use a lot to describe these concepts. And you're sitting at what once was a favorite bar of mine.